All right, listen up. Did you know that the field of performance management is constantly evolving to keep up the pace with the needs of organizations? Right now, we're in the middle of a new evolutionary phase, one that's shaping up as a showdown between the OKRs, the bold, disruptive framework that tends to stir up chaos, and the more traditional, stable approaches that aim for balance and consistency. Now, before we dive in, just a quick note. I already made a case in a previous video that KPIs are not a framework, so if you haven't seen that yet, please go check it out and then come back. Trust me, it will make this one make more sense. But why should you listen to one of my videos, let alone two? Well, I'm Ali. I have a PhD in performance management and years of experience as a management consultant under my belt. And my biggest pet peeve is business buzzwords, so you won't find any here. Back to frameworks. Today, we're diving into the differences and, yes, even some surprising similarities between the traditional approach to performance, often represented by balanced scorecard, and its less successful cousin, management by objectives, and the more modern, fast paced OKRs. Shocking, I know, but it turns out they're not as divergent as they seem. Let's start with a quick disclaimer. The following analysis is based on a more theoretical or textbook approach to these frameworks, if you will. That's because in practice, organizations don't often tend to follow the rules, especially not to a T. I've seen companies use balanced scorecard and integrate methodological elements of OKRs. I've seen companies use OKRs, but actually in a way it mirrors balanced scorecard, and so on and so forth. It's rarely black and white in the real world. I've seen a lot of comparisons that focus mainly on the components of each framework. The fact that OKRs have key results while balanced scorecard operates based on KPIs, that OKRs recommend a specific number of objectives, and the fact that they don't include perspectives the way balanced scorecard does. And sure, those structural differences are the first we notice. They're the most visible. But today, we'll talk about the differences that don't get as much attention. I want us to explore at a different level, at a deeper one, the less obvious differences, the more philosophical ones, if you will. Because here's the thing, a framework is not just a set of tools, it's a way of thinking, it's a conceptual model. While it doesn't prescribe step by step instructions, it's built on guiding principles, the underlying beliefs or values that inform how the framework is meant to be applied. These principles don't structure the content, they shape behavior and interpretation. All right, let's kick things off in a more positive way. So we're going to discuss about the similarities between OKRs and traditional performance management system because yes, they do have some things in common. So what's the shared DNA, you might ask? For starters, both OKRs and the more traditional performance management systems, like, as we said, balanced scorecard, management by objectives, are deeply rooted and aligned to the strategy of the organization. They all aim to answer the same question: how will we know we're moving towards our destination? They use objectives to define short term destinations and metrics, whether you call them KPIs or key results, to track the journey. They're also both great for communicating clear and relevant information, which, let's be honest, it's half of the battle in most companies. And here's another important one: you can use both OKRs and traditional frameworks at multiple organizational levels, not just operational or individual level, but also a team, enterprise level, departmental, division, and whatever other layers your organization might be comprised of. But this is pretty much where similarities stop. So where do we start with the differences? Right at the top of the list, we have agility, and not just the buzzword. OKRs usually work very well with agile frameworks, and there's a reason for that: timeline. OKRs usually operate on a quarterly cycle. That means objectives are set for about 3 months and progress is reviewed even weekly. Now, that means we're constantly identifying blockers, adjusting, staying flexible, and that also leads organizations to play offense and not just defense. Compare that with traditional performance management system, which tend to run on a yearly timeline. That means objectives are often set for 1 year and reviewed monthly in the best case scenario, or quarterly, or even twice a year sometimes. And that means if something's off track, there's no time to actually correct its course. Have you ever worked somewhere that sets objectives and then never looks at them? Yeah, same. So we all know that reactive approach, that's always scrambling to respond, always on the back foot, just trying to protect yourself for what's coming at you next. The second biggest difference: ambition. OKRs are designed to stretch teams. The objectives are intentionally challenging, often centered around innovation, growth, transformation, even experimentation. That can feel a bit disruptive, especially in organizations that are more stable, risk averse, and simply not built for constant change. But this ambition isn't about chaos, it's about moving the needle towards strategic priorities and gaining competitive advantage. On the other hand, more traditional performance management systems they tend to value stability and predictability. Their objectives often measure business as usual operations. They're usually objectives that teams are expected to achieve and not just influence. So while OKRs are asking, what can we do if we really push ourselves? With traditional frameworks, we are like, what do we know we can reliably deliver? The second difference, ambition, is tightly connected with the next two. Because here's the thing, innovation can't live at the top of the organization alone. OKRs thrive in environments that are less controlling and less prescriptive. They encourage autonomy where people at all levels can contribute ideas and feel some sense of ownership over the direction. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't some startup style free for all. There's still an hierarchy, and leadership still decides which ideas move forward. But the key is everyone should be invited to contribute if they wish so. Everyone should have this opportunity. Compare that to traditional performance management systems, which are usually more top down. The ideas and also the plan to deliver on those ideas comes from senior executives or middle managers, and oftentimes there's no room for dialogue, and there's also a lot more control. This brings us to everyone's favorite buzzword, alignment. If you've worked in business for more than 5 years, you're probably sick of alignment or even worse, cascading. But here's the thing, OKRs don't play well with traditional cascading, and at least not on their own. Why is that, you might ask? Because basically, cascading flies in the face of everything we've just said about innovation and autonomy. In a classical cascade model, top management sets the direction, middle managers translate it down the ladder, and that's pretty much it. No real conversation, no negotiation, just here are your objectives, here's how you're going to measure them, good luck. Now, that doesn't work when we're aiming for bold, ambitious objectives and change. You can't innovate under control and command. With OKRs, the process looks different. Yes, leadership still sets the strategic directions and the corporate OKRs. But here's the key, middle managers work with their teams and not above them to set the OKRs and their meaningful contribution. It's collaborative, it's bottom up and top down at the same time. For example, if marketing and product rely on each other to hit their objectives, then their OKRs need to reflect that as well. Unless you're working in a full on task force model, then you have to coordinate, otherwise, things will fall down pretty fast. Traditional performance management systems, they rarely demand that kind of alignment. They're mostly focused on vertical alignment between top and down of the organization, but not across functions. And finally, let's talk about the money. One of the most counterintuitive things about OKRs is the fact that they shouldn't be directly tied with compensation and bonuses. And I know that sounds backwards, but hear me out. If I told you to challenge yourself, to reach above business as usual, but in the same breath, I would tell you that your bonus depends on hitting 100% of your objectives, what are you going to do? Let's be honest. Most people would play it safe. They would set easy to achieve, low risk objectives just to make sure they would get the payout. And I know I would. But that completely defeats the purpose of OKRs because they're meant to stretch you but not punish you for trying. And now I know a lot of organizations still link OKRs to comp and ben, but that's a whole other conversation on its own, and we'll get into it into another video. If you're still here with me, you might be thinking, whoa, she's totally biased towards OKRs. Like this whole video sounds like a love letter towards OKRs. And honestly, I can't help it if OKRs look better on paper. But here's the real talk. Not every organization is ready or even able to unlock the full benefits of OKRs. So here's the thing. If your organization is super stable with a clear governance model, doesn't value innovation, but more so productivity and maybe staying within the benchmark, value steady performance, and its overall risk averse environment, then you might not consider OKRs your best friend. That doesn't mean you should completely ignore them, but you'll want to integrate OKRs very carefully just so they don't disrupt your day to day operations. When deciding between traditional and OKRs in terms of performance, I found there are two key questions you want to ask yourself. On one hand, How open is the organization to cultural change and innovation? And on the other hand, how conducive is your industry to innovation overall? Here's a quick example. Say you work in mining, maybe not directly in the mine, but somewhere in the industry. Wouldn't it really be smart to tell everyone, including the miners, to set ambitious OKRs, to challenge themselves and strive for innovation all the time? Probably not. I invite you to tune in next time to see if and how OKRs and traditional performance management systems can really work together. In the meantime, like and comment on this video if performance management still gives you mild existential dread. You're definitely not alone, and thank you for hanging out.